Welcome to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. I am Uriel Eisen.
And I am Devin Bodony.
And today we are talking about
production leveling and the three M's of the TPS, of Toyota Production System.
Yeah. I think everyone's introduction to lean and what's mostly on the internet, if you don't really crack open the books, and even I feel like on the first pass on a few of these books, what really stood out to me was the first M, which is waste, which is like they lean wastes, and like the thing everyone talks about, wasted motion, wasted human potential,
all the waste
defects, all those things. But if you kind of dig into those, I guess I've found, and I think you're finding as well, like they really start to highlight these other two M's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just give a couple examples of things we've seen in our shop and what production leveling is.
Yeah. And then also we have an Instagram account now, incremental CI. We're thinking this can be a place that everybody can put everything together, put all of our improvements in one place so we can all revisit and aggregate them.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is if you have an improvement and you post it to your story, or as a post, if you tag incremental CI, we can add it to the story there. And then we're trying to add it to highlights so they kind of stick around so people can just, if you're looking for some inspiration or ideas of things you might find in your shop, that'll just be a place to aggregate them. Also, jump into those DMs and let us know what we should talk more about or less about, or any feedback. So
yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, so I guess production leveling, as we mentioned, there's three M's that TPS identifies. They call them Muda, Muri, and Mura. So Muda is just waste. I think that's Japanese for waste. I don't really know.
I don't know the literal translation.
But. Yeah, but we'll probably shy away from those terms and just talk about what they mean
in English.
Yeah, so waste would be, again, those 8 lean wastes. Muri is overburdened, so that's like just overworking machines or people.
All of it. Over capacity.
Yeah, just pushing things too hard. And then Mura is unevenness. So that would be, unevenness in production, unevenness in sort of workload. So like going ham one week and then the next week you've gone through all your orders and there's kind of nothing to do. And that is also really difficult.
Yeah. I think I kind of wondered too if like uneven production within the system falls under that category. Like one machine running at 120 capacity, 120% capacity, and then the next machine just poking along at 10%. Like, I think that's a scenario where they would, that might also fall underneath that. I'm not sure. That also can go under wastes, but just in my head trying to figure out like ways to think about unevenness. I think it's overall shop up and down. I think it can also be within production systems.
Yeah, I guess it probably depends on how, like, what you're doing. Because if that is the level of production that is required to meet demand on a per day basis, I think that is the amount it should run.
Sure.
If on the other hand, like 1 week, one machine is slammed and you don't have enough capacity on that machine, and then the next week you don't have enough capacity on the other machine that was idle that first week.
Yeah.
I feel like for your shop or for a shop like that would be something where some of the writing and thinking that they've done on this topic would probably be pretty helpful.
Yeah. So leveling, I think, it's kind of straightforward when you think about it. It's just the idea that we do more or less the same amount of work per day, people specifically, but also the whole, production line, so that we are like optimally utilized, but also not overworked. So yeah, it's relatively simple, but actually implementing that can be extremely challenging because market demands are not even in general.
Yeah, so actually there's one specific example in the Toyota Way
Hmm.
that we've referenced here before, which is because it's such a reversal of, I think what's confusing when you're getting into like TPS and lean and is just like every time you feel like you've figured out what it's all about,
Yeah.
you read a line that's like specifically not that.
Yeah.
This is not what it's about. And so there was a gutter company,
Yeah.
and they have such a high demand seasonally that they were sort of trying to minimize all their inventory, like the classic sort of, you read about what Toyota's doing and you're like, okay, I will do that
Yeah.
for my company. And they finally hired a
A consultant. Yeah.
a veteran Toyota person
Yeah.
who came in and called for more inventory.
Right.
Right. So I actually just reread that chapter, and um, my understanding is they had a string on the side of the factory with the different months of the year and how much production, like where they should be on that string per month. So like,
Oh, right. They would just do a little extra every month that kind of went into that,
I
like
think
overflow capacity, sort of.
essentially they'd use that to level their production. So they'd address orders that like existing orders would happen first, but then anytime there weren't existing orders, they'd sort of work toward those goals.
Yeah.
And I'm not remembering the numbers exactly, but they went from like 13 uh yeah, 13 loading bays down to like 4.
Yeah.
They, I think, halved the size of their production floor. It was just like so many of their systems were optimized toward that like peak load, and even so, it was not efficient.
You mean prior they were optimized towards that peak load, and the
Yeah.
rest of the time they were under capacity?
Yeah, and so that was causing so much more waste than the waste of inventory.
Sure.
That for them, actually cutting inventory wasn't the move.
Yeah. So they optimized for the low end plus a small buffer, and that buffer went into inventory to handle the peak load.
Yeah, I think they took their full year's production and just divided it up by the month, right?
Yeah.
They said, okay, what's that divided by 12?
Uh-huh.
This is how much we should make per month. This is how many working days we have per month. And so this is what we should do per day, kind of.
Yeah, interesting. And I was just reading over the weekend is it a study of the Toyota production system by Shigeo Shingo? And he was kind of breaking down their scheduling. And it's very interesting because like the first half sort of their whole production line is done by forecast. So like all of the stamping and forming and all of the component parts of a car are done on a forecasted schedule based on market research predictions. And then the closer you get to final assembly, at some point it flips and it's done by, I think it's like final assembly of a vehicle is done by orders, like actual orders for vehicles.
Interesting. I thought that stuff was triggered by Kanban. I feel like in Ono's
I think it
book
is within the system.
Okay.
And there must be, at some point, there's got to be some like link between actual orders and like the assembly or whatever, or pre-assembly. But, and maybe it's changed. It's possible that it's changed.
Yeah, that's true too.
But I do think that, well, anyway, what Shigeo Shingo was saying was that all of the component parts of the vehicle, I think it is probably still within system done by Kanban, but I think the overall schedule of that production is done by market research prediction forecasting. So it's like this odd, like, because that stuff I think they do sort of need to level in a way that if it was done truly by order, would push a lead time out too far for what they want to achieve.
Yeah, I think there's that. I think also they make a big focus on producing, like, so if you produce to order, you might produce product like A, B, A, B, 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 A, C. And that is a problem that causes a lot of issues. And so I think they try to like look at all of that on a month basis or something and try to alternate like A, B, B, A, B, B, C. Something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's this slow shift from completely forecasted production at the earliest stages of production.
Interesting.
To like the final assembly on the day is a specific order for like a specific dealer and a specific person, kind of a thing. And it's kind of an interesting way to, because we think about it all as like, it's to order, it's triggered by the order, it's a like a fundamentally pull system. But then these other things, these overburden and unevenness, production leveling, priorities come in, and you have to adjust those systems to accommodate that somehow or another.
Yeah. And so
we still haven't actually really, I guess we talked about what leveling is, but what does that look like in a shop?
Well, I think it can look like a lot of things. I think what I've been moving toward, I mean, the goal is to be doing basically the same amount of work every day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even though the reality is that orders aren't the same every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And then being creative about how to achieve that, both from a sales perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because that's actually where the business starts,
Yeah.
right? As a sale. And really thinking about, like, for me, I kind of try to, not very successfully yet, but I've been trying to kind of figure out how we can build a sales funnel where we almost have people like queued up in a funny way, where we're like pretty high confidence that they'll convert. And I feel like everyone does this mentally, but actually just like explicitly having a column such that we can try to level production a little bit on the sales side.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we've also been doing, which I'm kind of like, I don't know, on the fence about, and don't quite know how to think about, is basically using big orders, like direct, like business to business. So like a manufacturer or a bike shop or
Mm-hmm.
someone else who's ordering our straps, basically offering sort of longer lead times to them because it's not urgent.
Yeah.
And using those to level our production. And then
just as like kind of fill in whenever there's space up to the lead time
essentially
boundary.
Yeah. And so what I try to do is every day print out 30, well, we just upped it because our demand has gone up, but basically a rolling average. So like if you look at the last 30 days, you can just divide that by 20, which is like 20 working days in a month, kind of.
Yeah, close-ish.
Yeah. And then say, okay, we should be producing X number of buckles per month and having them done and shipped. And so then I delivered those orders to the assembly station.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of the goal for the day, is to like get all those assembled and shipped. Or if it's a big order, we have a sort of a separate shelf where we break out those big orders into smaller orders so that they don't disrupt the production line. Because what we were finding is if we dropped an order for like 100 black 3/4 inch cam buckles
Sure.
on the line, it would deplete the reserves we have because it so far exceeded like our Kanban levels that we had kind of designed around.
Yeah.
So now I've been breaking those out, which is wasteful in its own way, but better, and we're learning. And I don't think this is the end state, but basically breaking those out into orders of 10,
Yeah.
and then interspersing them with direct to consumer orders.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe everything applies, but I think applying these principles in a small business where the margins can be a little thin is an interesting problem to tackle. And again, reading in the book this last weekend, he was kind of laying out that sort of how Toyota has tackled this. I don't think this is on the assembly line side. I think this is on the parts production side, is by having lower machine utilization per worker, but higher efficiency of worker use. And then scheduling or setting their capacity for their base demand at 50% of their plant capacity.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of like the dirty little like thing at the end of the sentence that they just kind of mumble in the corner is like, and then when there's peak demand, we bring in temp workers, which, and then have like each worker only run half as many machines, but do it faster. And you're kind of like, okay, cool. How do I do that? Like, temp workers, I don't think, maybe it's something we could, utilize as a small business, but it's not really like kind of the direction I want to go. I don't have a lot of capacity for training people. We don't have as standardized of processes to bring someone on board in 2 days and have them, just running production. So I think the way I've kind of handled this in the past is by having, basically like scheduling to capacity
Mm-hmm.
and then letting it just kind of the lead times push out and people get in the queue, which is, it's sort of a good position to be in. If there's demand, you can set your prices, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I want to keep customers happy. And if lead times push out too far, how do we deal with that? And so this idea of flexible capacity is a really interesting thing to try and tackle in a small business.
Yeah. So I think I have exactly the same kind of conundrum of like, in terms of optimizing for maximum utilization of our shop and of our people,
Yeah.
you'd kind of try to push that to 100% and book it out solid.
Right.
But then when someone comes and says like, oh, hey, we'd like to place an order, and you say, okay, well, actually we're in a great spot and we're booked for the next 6 months,
right,
like, then you're not delivering value to it. Like, yeah, you're not.
Yeah. Or like the same that we deal with the same like small order versus large order job issue, where we have a lot of jobs that are running a day or 3 days, and then we have like one we're about to start on this week that's going to be 6 weeks, and so that machine's tied up. So then the question is, okay, do we dedicate some machines for long runs and keep one open for short stuff? That has all kinds of other cascading issues of like, well, can we run every short job on that one machine? Is it set up properly? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
There's also there's the fact that we often limit ourselves to this 8 hours a day window.
Right. That's another lever is overtime.
Overtime or staggered schedules or automation.
Right.
All of these things have challenges. So anyway, it's
for sure.
It's a big conundrum.
It really is. I think like things that you might notice, I guess, in a business that's not manufacturing, or I should say things that we're noticing in our shop.
Yeah.
That sort of really point hard at production leveling. And this is sort of how we, I feel like you start a thing from the Toyota production system, you start doing it, and then you're like, wait a second, this causes this problem. And you reread the book and you're like, oh, that's why they're doing this other thing. And then you start doing that. And then, anyway, so what led us to this piece of production leveling is definitely like we dropped some big orders on our production line,
mm-hmm.
on our assembly station, and used up a few colors. And then we have like, 12 orders that are direct to consumer. And so they should really ship within a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't ship them suddenly. So we've just like really... And we can't ship the big order yet because we didn't even complete it.
Yeah.
So then you're sort of going through the big order, like scavenging parts to fill small orders or something, or just scrambling and staying really late to get an extra batch through. So like, I think this gets into the like overburden. If suddenly a particular station or a particular supply is like you're running through a ton of it, I think there's a few answers. The initially obvious answer is, oh, we should have more of that thing. So another problem we had was running out of pins.
Mm-hmm.
And so if like one day we did sort of like 100 buckles, let's say, then we'd run out of pins, and then have to run a bunch of pins on the CNC. And then like,
right.
That means we're not running the other stuff that we had sort of scheduled to run on the CNC.
Yeah.
And so one option, and this is still an option, would be to increase how many pins we keep on hand, right? And that's sort of the immediately obvious answer. I think the more challenging approach, but the more efficient approach, is production leveling. And that starts with orders, but that has a whole bunch of other pieces to it that, are worth really thinking about.
Yeah, I've sort of toyed with the idea of like... not sure of a good way to visualize it, but basically, so we have 3 people in the shop saying, okay, when things we're really slammed, maybe 2 of us come in these 3 days, and then we have 1 day of overlap with all 3 of us. And then the other 2, I'll probably be there the whole time, but the other 2 of us be there the other, 4 days of the week or something, and end up with a 6-day week.
Uh-huh.
So that gives you flexible, capacity to just push jobs through. A lot of the other stuff starts to fall through the cracks when you're doing that, though, because presumably each of those people has things to do aside from operating machines. So that has kind of its own issues. But I have thought about that as a way just when there's like to handle just surge capacity.
Interesting. So you're not increasing any one person's hours. Exactly.
No.
You're just spreading out. So there's someone present in the shop
We already,
more days of the week.
Yeah, we already
more
do that a
hours.
little. I work a 5-day week, and then both my employees work a 4-day week. And then like Ariel comes in early and leaves a little earlier.
Okay.
Quorum comes in a little bit later, leaves a little bit later. So we end up with a longer
nice.
overall day.
Yeah.
Which I think it can be a little helpful. But again, it's not flexible. It's just, it is what it is right now. But you could make that potentially more. You could slide those schedules past each other potentially for more flex.
Another place to look for flex, and I think people talk about this in a downturn, but is with improvements, right? So if you're doing an hour of improvements a day, and suddenly you have a huge surge, I mean, this is a really slippery slope, but presumably you could take an hour because like also when things are slow, instead of laying people off, you just work on some of those bigger improvements.
We tend to do that already, where in the slower times we'll work on internal shop projects and improvements and stuff. The issue is kind of this thing where it's like, I don't want to just buy more machines because I feel like we're at like, we've got plenty of machines. Also, we don't have more space physically. So how do we handle within our, the Toyota thing would be like, well, just have some more machines and let them run a little bit less, presumably. But
for what? For improvements? Or?
No, for handling the surge capacity. I think like, sometimes we're below the median.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the time we're above the median, but not above enough to like just buy more machines and kind of adapt to that next level.
Do you think that your spindle uptime is where it, I guess what I'm saying is are the machines the bottleneck on capacity?
I've been kind of standing there a lot and staring around the shop and wondering lately. I don't think they are the bottleneck. I think
it's still on like person on like people time.
I think it might be. So
like sales.
It's a mix. It kind of goes back and forth. Yeah. It's like right now, like we could still be more on the ball with change it, like having the R450 in the shop, the pallet changing machine, has been pretty illuminating in how much time is wasted waiting for an operator to change a part
of just spindle downtime.
Yeah, just seeing how much it runs, and how efficiently it runs. So seeing that is just like, whoa, okay. it moves through jobs very fast comparatively. Wow. So, but on the other hand, from the like utilizing people hours versus machine hours perspective, I don't want to just bring another person in and have, 2 people twiddling their thumbs half the time, but being super on the ball, tending the machines. And I don't want to have a person who's just a machine tender and really bored, like, because there is a lot more value in that person. So it's kind of this, it really comes back to this big juggle of how do we handle this capacity in a way that's overall efficient for the shop.
Efficient for the shop and satisfactory to the customer.
Yeah.
God willing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also all, there are the setup delays and programming delays that we're still working out kinks.
Right.
So it's definitely not one thing.
And just a cool tool for analysis here, I think, like Critical Chain basically talks about looking for inventory to find your bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like if you have, and I was just in your shop the other day, if you have a huge pile, hypothetically, of sawn material waiting like next to the machine, that indicates that the machine is a bottleneck.
Yeah.
However, if those piles of inventory move around, and I think we talked about this, like sometimes there's a pile of stock in front of the machine, sometimes there's parts waiting to be shipped, sometimes there's a bunch of POs, but the programs aren't done, then that indicates a moving bottleneck, which would be like some other asset that touches all of those stations. In this case, that would be
me,
you, or people.
Yeah.
In some cases, that could be like a forklift. In a bakery, maybe that's an oven where it's like it is used in a lot of different processes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yeah, I think like that was a really useful tool for me to kind of look for bottlenecks. And I do think, actually thinking about it here, bottlenecks have a large part. Like, it's really helpful to know where your bottlenecks are
Mm-hmm.
in terms of addressing this like production leveling, because really you're trying to level it for your bottleneck, right? Because if you can
Sure.
keep your bottleneck busy,
but not over, like not
not
actually a bottleneck.
not actually a bottleneck. Yeah. And so, yeah, to be continued, because I don't feel like either of us
We have
has
not figured
solved
this
this
out.
problem. And the thing is, I'm not sure it can be solved, honestly.
Sure.
Right? I think it can just be,
It's just mitigation strategies.
yeah, to like get closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it, right, is the idea is that like, even if we were to, reduce all of those bottlenecks, then there would still be surge capacity that we would still have to figure out how to handle. So like,
Yeah.
even in a perfect world where your system is totally refined and you move product through your production process seamlessly to order, etc., there's still going to be a need for surge capacity. And so that you have to kind of decide on how you're going to handle that when it happens.
Right. And I think the way Toyota likes to do it, because of the relative costs, is that to be an equipment, right? Not people.
Mm-hmm.
So I do wonder for your shop if, I don't know, like, it's funny. I feel like small shops, or for me, like buying a CNC was by like far and away the biggest purchase I've ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think there's sort of a tendency to focus on it as the big cost of your business
Mm-hmm.
in a funny way.
Yeah.
Even if it's not really.
Yeah.
Um,
And as we said, that I just realized that like a lot of shops our size handle this with pricing. And when your capacity goes up, your pricing goes up to level your sales influx.
Right. But I don't know if that's a great answer either. That sort of points to a desire to stay the size you are, I would say, a little bit, right? Because
Mhm.
otherwise you sort of want to push over that capacity long. Like, if you're just, I mean, the idea is like supply and demand, right? So
Mhm.
like, as supply goes down, prices go up, and demand is reduced such that it matches how much capacity you have left, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that suggests that you're not trying to go over capacity and sort of grow into it, right? And like, keep your prices a little bit low, maybe work a little bit too hard, and then add another machine, because you're like, okay, we've had like enough work to buy another machine for 3 months or something. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I think that is also not great for your customer to just be like, oh, we're really busy now, so our prices are high. And now
It's
it means
true.
that they can't really rely on you as a supplier. It's
Yeah.
more like, well, check in with them and see where their prices are at now.
Yeah. No, that definitely like points to needing to have a very large customer base and a lot of sales pressure from a large customer base that you can sort of pick and choose, which is fine in like a strong market, but
Right.
in a downturn is not very tenable.
Not very tenable. And I think in a hot market, a supplier that is doing a lot of that, as someone who, maybe relies on suppliers, that would not be your first choice.
Sure. Yeah, I would find that frustrating.
Yeah, you'd be like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. So
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to buy raw material and it was
sorry, we don't have much, so we're gonna jack the prices up.
super different from week to week, I'd be like, okay, I'm not working with you anymore.
Yeah, it's sort of a waste of time even to get a quote.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's interesting. That is, I think, a very common lever that businesses use, but it is, having just picked it apart, maybe not a great one to lean on too hard.
yeah, maybe it
in the long
depends
run.
on your business. Like, if you're in something that's super hard to find,
Yeah.
right? And there aren't many options then, but it's still not nice to your customer.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. I have a funny improvement from this week that speaks to, just rationalization that we were talking about last week.
Uh-huh.
So we've been looking at our assembly area. Every now and then we have a lot of different color buckles, and then we offer them in 3 strap lengths and 3 strap colors,
Uh-huh.
it is very easy to get one of those things wrong and ship it to a customer.
Uh-huh.
So I've sort of been trying to figure out systems to make that easier, because we also assemble to order. And so it's not like you can figure out what you're making and then make like 10 of them.
Yeah.
It's like make 1 with all these parameters and then make 2 with a totally different set of parameters. And the biggest issue we've had consistently is shipping the wrong strap color.
Huh.
Because basically you assemble the buckle and then you get a strap length. I would say around 50% of our straps end up being black. And then the other ones, we have these 2 other colors. So it's really easy to sort of get in a groove and assume it's black. And sometimes the formatting on the order slip pushes the webbing color to the next line. Oh. And so it's not even on the same line. Anyway, so I've been scheming up, like, could we program it? So we like what's the API from the program that's producing those order slips? And could we somehow like turn on LEDs under each bin? So you knew exactly what to pick and exactly what webbing length to cut, and it would illuminate which webbing color to cut. And I was sort of like trying to figure that out, figuring out if there's like a cheaper, easier version where it's just like analog, where you just, as a memory tool, almost have these boards that you could slide to show which thing you're meant to do. So it would be like a really visual way of referencing that. Mm-hmm. We have this new guy in the shop, and I was shipping orders that he was assembling. And after like 2 days, I was like, he has not made a single mistake.
Oh, wow.
So I went and asked him, like, what are you doing? Turns out he was cutting the webbing first. So the first thing he would do is check the color, cut the length, and then assemble the buckle. And so instead of spending a ton of money and a ton of development time
on an LED system,
on a very fancy LED system, or even like a semi-simple, anyway, so that just changing the standard operating procedure on that station, I think, is going to solve that quality issue to a large degree.
That's cool.
Very cool. It also points to the need for SOPs, because I think it's going to be a challenge for me and the other guy who's been assembling buckles and doing it a different way for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
To make that switch reliably, I think is going to be challenging. And
can you change the layout so it's just kind of how it has to happen? Where it's like,
that's an interesting question.
You just like have the webbing and the cut station first, and then you like move.
Right now, you don't have to move at all, which is a separate issue. Speaking of production leveling, that station is really highly optimized. But because it's so optimized, you can't fit 2 people in it. And so if we want to double throughput, like we've had some articles drop in like Outside Magazine, and then the next few days are just insane. And you kind of want to meet that demand. It's sort of like a once in a,
keep those people happy.
Months. Yeah. Exactly. And so, but we're like, you literally can't add a person to that station. And so that is not great, because we do have pretty simple actions in the shop. And so we do have a bunch of people who are semi-trained and can jump in there like, a couple times a year.
Friends and family.
Exactly. So, but I just thought that was so interesting. So I spoke to my brother who teaches aviation and does a lot of work in like designing cockpits and stuff like that. And basically on how do you teach a culture of working off of SOPs? Because in aviation, that is standard.
Yeah. In
the medical industry, I just read the book Checklist Manifesto to try to learn more about how to make good checklists. And there actually, people have put a ton of thought into it, and there's a lot of research into it. So that's pretty interesting. But the really challenging part is, I think there's this aspect of working off of checklists that can feel like you're a mindless drone. Right?
It's a little bit emasculating.
Yeah, where it's just like, it feels like it's not like leveraging your creativity, your like skills. It's sort of like,
I'm really good at checklists.
Any of that. Just go off this checklist. Which I think is a bit of a misunderstanding. Like, I think it is sort of gets back to that wasted human potential. It's like, you shouldn't be using your brain to make sure you don't make mistakes that have been made previously. Right? We've come up with a good way of doing this very reliably. Here's how you do it. And check these key aspects. And then you can instead think about ways of improving that checklist, or ways of improving the actual thing that you're doing. Right. Yeah, like use your creativity on the
between checks
5% of this thing that could use some creativity. But it struck me that like in aviation, that is something that's been very reliably done is training up pilots who that's what they do. They look at checklists. A very amusing thing, which is not exactly relevant. One of the examples in the book was of a Cessna, I forget what model, single engine.
Yeah, small plane
with one pilot. On the, like, if your engine stops midair, it's I think a 6-step process to restart the engine. The first step, this is literally in the checklist on that airplane, is fly the plane. Because people get so like zoomed in on solving the engine that sometimes they crash because they forget to fly the plane.
Wow.
Yeah. I asked my brother about this. He said the order of operations is always very important. Like and he said, aviate, navigate, communicate, always in that order. Which is interesting. But like, I think the rest of us aren't often thinking so. It's funny. They have this forced situation where it's like deadly if you don't get this stuff right.
Yeah.
But in a funny way, it is too to us. It's deadly in a
slow way.
Or like your business goes, like you go out of business, right? Or whatever, you lose a lot of money. Like it's not less important just because you don't die. No. It's just doesn't get the attention and the time because you're not going to die. And so
the buffers are more lenient, right? Like you're not going to die. If you chose not to go get another job, you could die. But I
think what I'm saying is like, just because you're not dying, I think it's just irrational to not put the same level of care into the thing.
No, totally.
Yeah. Like it makes sense. Like no one wants to die. And so there's definitely going to be a certain urgency there to fix those problems. But,
interesting. This kind of leads into one thing and we've chatted about this briefly in the past. I think we've kind of like solved a bunch of stuff over the last couple months. New person, new machine, getting into a good flow, and now we're kind of into this next like sort of like gestation period of like integrating.
Okay,
just figuring out what we're going to tackle next. And one of these, it's been a long process, but one of these is like machine setups and how to effectively communicate that from me. Or from the CAM program to the setup person and to a running part.
And so I could imagine breaking that into 2 categories. One would be a part that's already run that you're running again, but you're talking about parts that are new to the shop.
We treat them as one and the same.
Okay, interesting.
For the sake of not having to decide whether a part's going to be running it, because you never know, basically. So you kind of... there are a handful of things where I'm like, we are never going to see this again. This is a explicit prototype. It will be different next time. But even so, like if if someone else is doing the setup, then did the programming, it's kind of 6 or 1/2 Like they need the information regardless. So I've just been standing there kind of staring at this and being like, okay, all of the information needed to run this program is in CAM. And so there's this weird thing happening, right? Where I stare at the program, I figure out what of it is critical, how to communicate it. Then I go type it into our setup sheet. Then Uriel reads the setup sheet, and then she does the things at the machine, which seems when I lay it out like that, I'm just kind of like, this is a little ridiculous. Like the information's there. How do we make this transition smoother? There's a lot of ways to tackle that. I think one thing that we did was, and I saw someone on Instagram, I can't remember who it was, did the same thing where they put the information they want for their tools in the header. Like Fusion or HSM Works, which we use, outputs a bunch of information per tool, but it's kind of like, why'd they choose that? Turns out any information that you input, any field in the tool setup can be output there
in that header.
In that header. So you can pick and choose. That's something I did a while ago, really just started using it recently. And that's really helpful because now instead of typing everything out, I just copy and paste the whole header into the setup sheet. So that's great. And then I can make edits if I need to, if there's like a variance from our standard tool situation or something.
So it sounds like the thing you maybe are noticing is that all the information exists
Yes.
and it just is not visible in the right ways in the right places. And it's sort of frustrating to do a highly manual process to make that happen.
Manual, partially. Subjective, I think, is the primary issue, where I am having to go through and like very consciously decide what information is critical and then how to best get it across.
Does standardized tooling sort of help with that to some degree?
Standardized tooling has helped a lot. It's more, and this again points to standardizing other things, which is maybe we just standardize work setups.
Right.
But then,
interesting.
How do you deal with edge cases?
Right.
Because the nature of our work is that not everything is going to fit within, well, maybe we have a standardized edge case set up for like really big parts, right? But it spirals very quickly.
Yeah, but also I would guess that if you kept adding standards, I mean, within reason,
yeah.
you know,
yeah.
What is if everyone's super from The Incredibles, no one is. if every setup is a standard setup, do you have a standard setup? But you could just try to get like 90% of the things you hand off to be in a standard setup.
Yeah. So that has maybe seemed like the simplest way to approach this. At the same time, I'm annoyed that like the information's there and there's not sort of a pathway that exists for, maybe there is actually, and I just haven't dug deep enough.
I feel like, aren't there setup sheets built? You use HSM, I use Fusion, but I think there's setup sheets built in there.
They are. I've like poked at them a couple times and tried to use them and found them very wanting, but it's very possible that I just didn't have like the template set up properly.
Because the nice thing there is I bet you can get some pretty good, I mean, I'm even thinking like a visual of the tool setup, right? Like it knows the stick out, the diameter, the tool holder it's in.
Yeah, I feel like we've tackled tools pretty well.
Okay.
It's mostly part orientations, vice use, like which vices are we using? Where is it set up? Which orientation is the vice in?
Interesting.
Is it on a trunnion or on the table? Like,
that does feel like if you could, I'm imagining like a photo.
I've screenshot some stuff
of like, here's the 8 that we most commonly use. And then maybe just start there.
Yeah, I've been thinking about trying to standardize across machines, but again, that has proven to be more challenging than I expected.
Interesting. I remember the SMED book, Single Minute Exchange of Dies. In that he recommended never making a setup sheet, like trying to make a universal setup sheet. He's like, don't do it. Make a setup sheet for every single part. Which just made me think that like they'd tried that, because the temptation is definitely to standardize, but I do feel like sometimes standardization increases efficiency, but it decreases flexibility.
Yeah.
And then also it is especially bad if you end up just breaking that standard repeatedly, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I tagged this on is because my other thought has just been a checklist.
Okay.
That has essentially all the potential variables of, I guess it would be like what your work holding is, how it's oriented, what your stock is, how the stock's oriented, where your origin is, per operation, all of that kind of stuff.
Have you looked at Google Forms?
No.
I'm just imagining, what if you had a drop-down menu on all those questions to tell people all the answers?
Interesting.
Because Google Forms, you can build these really easy. I think you can also upload a photo.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you just downloaded the Google Forms on your phone, if you could just like take a photo of your screen or just import a screenshot.
Yeah, we already import screenshots into Airtable on the setup.
Okay, yeah,
sometimes
Airtable is the way to go, because the Airtable can also do drop downs. But I'm just thinking like,
but the way that it was built, that's one of my main gripes with it. Actually, is that like the setup is just like a text box.
I see.
And so, but we could link in that text box to a form.
Interesting.
Which could be pretty cool.
Yeah, because that could almost be your checklist, but it could be a checklist for you to actually gather the information.
I think it's more for me, honestly, as the person putting the information in, to make sure that all the critical stuff is there.
That makes sense.
And then there could be an additional check, I guess, for the setup person to make sure everything is done. But that's also like pretty easy. Just be like, is there a vice on the table? Oh yeah, there's a vice on the table.
I hear you that it's easy, but that doesn't mean it happens, I feel like. And it will
Yeah.
happen most of the time, but you are definitely counting on sort of like awareness and common sense and vigilance, I would say.
That's true. It's probably just that it hasn't become the problem yet.
Yeah, yeah. What if you had like a sheet that was sort of like, it had a stock section and all the answers pertaining to stock were sort of in one, ideally color or something on, I mean, not that you're going to do color because black and white toner is cheap. No, but you know, yeah, I feel like as the operator, it'd be easy then to know at least where to look.
Yeah.
We've done some learning and some reading about this. The one thing I think I've learned is that there is a difference between a checklist and an instruction manual. So we wrote these checklists, and then in user testing, it was kind of like, well, this detail is not explained and this detail is not explained. And so there's this question of like, how much expertise should you be bringing to the table versus how much should everything be spelled out exactly. And the more exactly it's all defined, the less useful it is as a checklist and the less it gets referenced because it gets like so bulky and so long.
And so, it's like, yeah. Okay.
And so the thing I think I've settled on but haven't implemented yet, and then I was just reading the Toyota Way again, and they were talking about this. So Toyota has a binder of like a really in-depth here's exactly how you're going to do it. That is not present on the station, like open, like no one can see it. It's typically a binder either at the station or at the like,
it's reference material for if needed. So
like the first question, if there's any issue, is was standard operating procedure followed to a T, you know? And if it is, then you know you need to update it. And if it wasn't, then you know you need to train it. But then there's another checklist that is sort of more kind of procedural.
An actual checklist.
Like a SOP, standard operating procedure, that's more sort of visual, I think, often. And that is not facing the operator. That is facing away from the operator. That is for auditing. So you're meant to know the steps, and then, but someone looking at the station can it's almost like a visual control, can tell if you're doing it right or wrong,
and what is for the operator? They just have to know it.
I think they just train it enough where they know it. I think for me, I think it would be nice to have maybe a shortened list. My brother recommended having a checklist that's more for the operator. And then maybe on the back of the page, it would be that same checklist, but broken out a lot more details.
Fully explicit,
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe there's 3 documents, but maybe for now we'll just do 2. One is like a really, did you check everything critical? And the other is sort of if you are new to the thing or you haven't done it in a month or something.
Yeah, that's one thing that's interesting is like how to get continued buy-in, especially with repeated things. Because it's like most people, once they get it, they're kind of like, I got this. Why do I need to check it off every time? And which begs the question, if they do, like, do they need it? If it really is to the point where it's like checking a box is really just an extra step that's unnecessary. And that might vary from, in aviation, as we said, it's life critical. So checking the boxes
as well.
So, but maybe in a shop, it is one of those things where it's just like, it's there for reference. You checked it early on to make sure you got it, fully ingrained. And then at some point it's just there for reference and to double check.
I think so. I think for us, we're doing like point and call on setups because we do these repetitive setups where each station is slightly different.
Point and call.
So point and call is from, I think, Japanese train systems. So the problem with checklists is sometimes people memorize checklists and then basically rattle them off, even though
they haven't done
thing
it
in front of them isn't actually checked. And so point and call is you point, it's like a trained set of things you point at and you call out their state essentially. And so
to another person or just to yourself?
I think the idea is that it's to another person, but for us, it's to ourselves. But it's still like you do it out loud. You point at it and call it state rather than something else about it. Anyway. So you could also sort of do something like that where you train it to become so habitual and so quick that it's not annoying. I think the problem is when you don't remember it, but you basically know you did it right. So you're like, I didn't do it. Anyway, I don't know.
Interesting. You have some other improvement stuff here in the list.
Yeah, so we're having issues with Kanban levels and quantities. We've had these same issues and we've discussed them here for our CNC'd parts before sandblasting,
Yeah.
where we were running out of parts.
Yeah.
And the solution there, the obvious solution, I think, was like, we're running out of stuff. We need more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What totally solved the problem was just having more triggers in that same stock.
Yeah.
The 6 rules of Kanban, one of them is reduce the number of Kanban. Maybe I just need to read more about how to set levels of Kanban, but I don't know how you decide how many triggers to have. Like, I think there's a lot of talk about quantity for that last Kanban, again, in more of a 2-bin system where it's like, you have a Kanban, how many parts should you have behind your final trigger?
Right. Isn't it supposed to just be how long it takes to replenish?
It is, but actually there's a very useful thing you can do of adding more triggers to an existing pool.
Sure.
And so I don't know who's writing about that. Like, I kind of want to read more about how to think, or maybe I'll just do it myself. But anyway, I think what we're coming to is like, we need to break up that stock into smaller increments. In our paint station, we do batches of 32 on any part in one color.
Mm-hmm.
But I was sort of thinking about this. It's pretty irrational because the reason to do 32 is that doing a color change is kind of time consuming. You have to clean out the gun, mix the paint, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're willing to do 4 color changes per painting session, it does not follow that we should do 32 of each part, right? We could do 8 of one and whatever, 40 of another, right? They are on racks of 8. So for the time being, we will stick to increments of 8, but still that's a lot smaller than 32, and it would solve our problems.
Also, a rack doesn't have to be full.
That's true. Yeah, for sure. Well, we're moving. I think we're going to try to move to a robot, so that'll be single pieces. But so for now, I think we're going to stick to 8. But either way, yeah. So we actually ran out of. So demand has sort of increased quite a bit, and it's starting to surface these problems at our assembly station where we've been running out of colors recently. And so it's time to kind of revisit our Kanban levels there.
Yeah.
I don't actually want to increase how much inventory we hold. I think we can fix it by my current thought is to have, instead of 32 parts, then a Kanban card, and then 32 parts behind the Kanban card. My thought is just to have a Kanban card every 8 parts. And then every day we will pull a mix of colors off of a board where those get aggregated to optimize for availability. And so we might, and we'll always paint like 4 colors, but we might paint more of one and sort of less of the other. And so we're always maintaining a healthy level of stock.
So you'll see the aggregate and you'll be able to see kind of like what the pressure is there for like.
Yeah. Instead of just like random, like, we barely sell any of this color, but today for some reason it triggered. And so now it's going to back order us on 2 other colors because that we should have painted today, which is like silly. The other funny thing, and this gets back to like production rationalization, is it would be more efficient for our company to be less efficient in the paint department if we just did more color changes per painting session. We would get fewer parts per hour in, but we would be able to ship more product and hold lower inventories across the board. Like, if you knew reliably that you could get a resupply, even if it was only 8 new parts tomorrow or in 3 hours, we could hold much less inventory. And so it's sort of interesting because it is really annoying to mix new parts. So to
mix new paint.
Yeah, sorry, to mix a new paint color. So I have a cousin who did a lot of work in like transplant, like organ transplant.
You really
stuff.
know people.
And so I was talking to him. I think peristaltic pumps will work there. And there's some very cheap peristaltic pumps. So I could have one specific to each color and then basically just call out how many milliliters I want instead of like putting a cup on a scale, pouring the paint by hand, trying to hit a very precise number, inevitably kind of overshooting that number. Then I have to like type that number into a computer.
Yeah. So what's the mixing?
What do you mean?
Like you're saying mixing paint. Like, are you actually mixing like a ratio?
Yeah. So I pour out a color into a cup.
which is a powder or a liquid?
It's a liquid.
Okay.
And then enter that into a tool, a spreadsheet basically, that references that color, how many grams it is, what your mix ratio is to your part B. And then I open a syringe of a common part B and put in X number of grams of that, and then let that mix for like 2 minutes.
And then there's cleaning post.
Yeah. And then it all gets cleaned with acetone, which is...
How much are the guns?
The guns are like 250-ish, 350, something like that. I have 2 right now. Could get more.
One can be cleaning. Like, is it an active process or do you just soak it?
It is right now. There is equipment that will clean a gun. They're thousands of dollars.
Interesting.
Not to say it's not worth it, but
yeah, I mean, it does seem like if you could be cycling, if you could have not necessarily dedicated guns per color, but cycling through guns so that setup was much less of a thing, that would be pretty worthwhile.
Yeah. So I think decreasing setup on the paint in the paint department, like this is another example of like we are batching because setup is time consuming and annoying.
Or even, I don't know, just from the SMED system, not even focusing on decreasing setup time, but just making it external instead of internal setup time.
Yeah. The problem right now is I paint
Uh-huh.
and I'm the only one up there.
Yeah. But someone else could be mixing paint.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. No, that's something to look at for sure.
Or, you know, if you are going to robot paint,
right,
then the robot's painting and you can be mixing colors.
Yeah. We could talk about robots. I'm looking to get a robot for paint, but we could also, we are at an hour.
Yeah. I thought maybe we should, we had that brief conversation last week after the podcast about like where to focus energy in a business. Like it's very easy and fun to focus on production, but I don't know if we want to dive into it all, that like these aren't things, all these processes shouldn't be necessarily confined to the internal processes of the business, but should also be like focus these lenses on like how the business exists in the world, like where you put your energy. Anyway, do you want to jump into that at all?
Happy to. I'm not quite, it's not jogging my brain.
Oh, just about how like it's really easy to similarly that like machinists really tend to focus on like what's happening in the machine, and you need to look at the bigger process. I think it's all of us. It's really easy to focus on how we make our stuff and not necessarily like, are we making enough stuff? Are we satisfying the greater demand? Is refining our process the best way to increase our profit? That kind of stuff, which I think is just an important, easy thing to miss.
Definitely. Yeah. So I think, right. I think like, let's see. So if we spend an hour a day on process improvement and all of that process is focused on what we already make, one could make the argument that you'd be better off basically working on top line revenue rather than making your current systems more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is another option there of making your system of product development. Like if you think you need to break into a new market, or you think you need to, like a lot, I think for us, like we're both pretty small companies in the grand scheme of things, right? And so like, I think this has been a lot of fun to think through our processes, and we've made huge gains there. I mean, for me, I haven't released a new product in quite some time. And like, I think there's probably more opportunity to grow the business, or to grow profits, let's just say, on introducing new products than there is on making our current process slightly more efficient, or not running out of a color on our production, on our assembly station. Like, so what? So people have to wait an extra 2 days, Right. Okay, fine. But and I think that there's something to that, right? Like, it's not just like polish this one thing you're doing right now, but like staying aware of where the business needs to be.
I think it's a both thing. Like if you do polish and build out these systems, you'll be in a better position to release more stuff, to grow the business more efficiently down the line. I think it's just easy to forget that that's part of what you have to do as well.
Yeah. And I think like my background was definitely coming from the startup scene, where I feel like this sort of nuts and bolts is, do we make money on each transaction, is
completely missed,
largely deferred.
Yeah.
I mean, the assumption is that you're going to spend your way to product market fit and spend your way to market share, and then become profitable, and you've radically changed the industry, or made a new industry or something. So,
and now Uber is just really expensive.
Right. It's like, oh, it's the price of a taxi cab plus the convenience of flagging it from your phone, from your smartphone. And they have a nice app and you can see where your driver is.
Yeah.
I think there's that. I think also, like, it's worth remembering that any process we do is sort of fair game for improvement, and largely most companies don't take time to work on the thing they're doing, but just do the work.
Yeah.
And so, like, if it is the focus to grow into a new market, there's probably ways of doing that more efficiently, or there's the brute force method. And I think it's worth I think Toyota demonstrates that it is worth in the long run. And I think maybe that's part of it, right? There is a hard constraint of a business where if you hit zero, it's a problem. So I think that's worth keeping in mind.
And reading that study of the Toyota production system book this last weekend, again, it is like a lot of these books are about nuts and bolts. And then he's talking about in that production forecasting part, how much money they spend on market research. Significant. I don't know what the conversion is to yen to dollars when that book was written, but it was billion of yen that they would spend every handful of months to do their next forecast of production. Wow. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so that's a part that most people completely forget about.
Right.
The wholesale side, the marketing side, like, what are we going to make? How are we going to get this to people? Is it the right thing? Is it a thing that people want?
Yeah.
And that's, I think it's just important to loop back to that.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is exactly, I was sort of thinking about the focus of all this recently. And there's a funny dichotomy, I feel like, in TPS and lean, where you're simultaneously like called on to really zoom out really far, right? But also kind of address, like, the only real things, if you think about the activities we do in a day, those are actually the only things we can really control as inputs to the outcome of our business, is like, literally, what are you doing during your day? And it's actually a bunch of really small actions. And so you're simultaneously like holding this very global, zoomed out view of your whole system, but then you're making improvements on these very microscopic things, right? And it's a very weird place to be. And I think a lot of people end up in a bad middle ground where you're not analyzing things from a global view of looking at sales through, like, looking at the whole picture instead of just like, oh, we need to make our paint department faster. It's like, do you? I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of where, like, buying new equipment sort of lies. Not to say you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of like, oh, we have this problem in this department. Let's buy another piece of equipment. Instead of like, how does this fit into our whole business process? And then can we cut our strap before assembling the buckle? And that solves our problem, right?
Yeah.
And
I think it's that's partially a feature of being like small businesses, where we run the business and we work in the business as well. And I think, Toyota talks, or in the Toyota Way, the author talks a lot about how there's that interplay between the shop floor and the management, and they're both sort of responsible for holding half of that dichotomy.
True.
And I think I think it is weird for us at this scale, because we're having to hold the whole dichotomy. And then, when you get to a bigger company, the management can be sort of responsible for the overview, the 1,000-foot view, but reference the shop floor people for, like, how's this going to work on the daily? And then the shop floor people can do the opposite.
But I think what's striking, and I think it differentiates Toyota from other companies, and this may be incorrect, but my analysis today is that there is a like a focus on these microscopic things, like, oh, we're taking 4 steps, can we reduce that to 2 steps? We're like literally stepping across the shop floor, can we, just like all these tiny things. We're turning a screw 8 times to fasten it, is there a possibility where we do a quarter turn because that's the only part you care about,
right? They're really taking the like every penny counts to the nth degree.
And then simultaneously, like, rationalization of like, where are you in the full picture? Like, zoom all the way out. What makes the most sense here? Is it holding inventory? Is it holding no inventory? How do we make that happen? Whereas instead of just a sort of at a glance, what are, like, I feel like a lot of companies sort of focus on this like middle area of like, yeah, we can rent a bigger shop, we can buy a new piece of equipment, we can, like, none of it is super efficient, and there's a lack of a global view of how it fits in. I think
it's like a big compromise instead of these like hyper focus on the two ends of the
maybe
spectrum.
I don't know.
It is an interesting thing to kind of hold in your head. I thought the Toyota's dedication to hybrids instead of full electric was kind of an interesting case study on that, where like kind of everybody's saying like it's either all or nothing, and then they were kind of like, well, if we analyze all of it, like the full picture, we find that we can get, with a certain number of batteries produced per year, if we put them in hybrids versus all electric cars, we can get this many more hybrids on the road than we could all electric cars, and our overall net carbon savings are significantly more.
It was like 5 or 8 times.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. It was like a lot less, like a lot larger reduction in CO2 emissions with the same number of batteries, whether like if they put them in hybrids or versus
and electric. It was really interesting to be like, okay, so and I think most consumer simplistic view is just like, oh, that seems kind of short-sighted. And then you like dig into it and you're like, wow, they really thought about that.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. I have a tiny little detail that relates to mental workload. So I was at the bandsaw cutting stock, and I noticed that I need to make 24 cuts to load a particular tray for our pins. And the way I've been doing it for the past 2 years is I count 1, 2, 3, 4, so on to 24. And I think to do that, you are holding your target in mind. So 24.
Right.
You're also then counting and incrementing that by 1, and then you're comparing it to your target. And sometimes you forget what your target is, and you're like, wait, how many did I need? Oh yeah, 24. Wait, where am I? So I just switched to counting down, because when you're done. You don't have to remember your target at all, right? It's just kind of built in. So I was just wondering, like, if counting down is less mentally taxing than counting up to a target.
Interesting.
Like, you just hold the target in mind one time, you figure out what it is, and then you go, okay, 24, 23, 22, right?
I really want to get away from counting.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal.
We do too much counting. I did send an email this last week to figure out if there's an effective parts counter on our lathe, because that seems to be the big offender. We've started using the parts counter on the mills a lot, and
cool.
Like pretty much everywhere, and actually had Avi add that as a toggle into our post.
Very cool.
So it will activate the parts counter. You still have to put in the number at the machine.
The target number?
Target number.
Okay.
But from a not overproducing standpoint, the machine stops when it hits the number. It will not do anything.
Really?
You cannot.
Until you clear it or something?
Until you clear it. So you can't overproduce, which has actually been really helpful, because there's definitely times where you're just like, how many do we make? Oh, crap. We made 5 extra. We could have been doing the next setup in that time. Or we could have already been running the next part.
Right.
And it's also a very simple check where it's like, I left early on Friday to go away for the weekend, and Ariel had shipped something, and I looked at the parts counter and I was like, that wasn't enough.
Oh no.
But because she's super on the ball, I sent her a text and she was like, oh no, we had 3 in stock. So I pulled those and put them from the last order. And I was like, hell yeah, that's awesome. But it is very helpful just to have it counted. You have to count for scrap if there is any.
Right.
And we sort of need to come up with an SOP for how we do that. And still working on what that's going to be. But I really want it for the lathe, because we often run full bars where bar pulls, and so it's like a very capable offender. And
Interesting.
this happened last week where we ran like 40 extra parts than we needed for op1.
Brutal.
And I was just like, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like some 60-61. We weren't actually ready to run the next part, so it wasn't like, at this stage, it's not a huge deal, but that's not something I want to habituate to.
Well, and what is already a big deal is the counting, right? You
Yes.
already are sort of, how many have we made?
Yeah.
Do we count them? Can we weigh them?
Yeah.
Are too many chips in there to get it accurate?
Yeah,
right?
I just really want to get away from it.
Yeah.
It's a total waste of time.
Yeah, we have that sometimes when like I'm trying to develop better systems when we pass assembled buckles to the shipping area.
Yeah.
There's some level of verification, which is nice, which is sort of like doing a last count before they ship.
It can be a really valuable QC state.
But I think it's worth being very explicit about what the goal is.
Yeah.
Is it to do QC? Is it to do a count? Are we doing a second count? Can we be confident enough in our first count by going a little slower that we're dead on and that all those parts made it from station 1 to station 2?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
we do have a counting scale. And maybe we just need to work to make it more accessible and integrate it into the system better.
Do you have one that has pre-programmed buttons?
I don't know. I don't think so. I have only used it like twice. It was extremely confusing, actually.
Someone out there, make a product that is a really, really good counting scale. Not accurate. Like pre-programmed buttons, integration with barcodes, so you could scan a thing and it knows what you're counting.
I mean,
it probably exists.
It's probably just like
$20,000. Yeah, someone make a cheap one. Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Cool. That might be us for today, huh?
Yeah, I guess it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody who was listening. We went over an hour again anyway. Thank you to everybody who was listening. We've been enjoying the feedback, all that.
Yeah, keep it coming. Also, I know this is every podcast, but if you can leave us a review on Spotify, we got the notification that we don't have enough reviews for it to even show a review. So if you're enjoying the podcast, please review it. It's super helpful to us. And also, please share it with a friend. If you're getting value out of it, think of someone else in your life who might also benefit from it. Again, we are not experts in this, but just trying to open a window into us struggling through implementing all these ideas.
Yep.
And the more people we have along the way dropping us new ways of thinking about things or benefiting from what we've kind of learned, the better. So
yeah, and we're still working to get it on Apple. We'll let you know when that finally works. And that's it.
Till next week.
Catch you later.